They sealed it in a moon and called it dead. We cracked it open and walked out alive. The old man's hands were the first thing you noticed. Scarred at every knuckle, 2 fingers on the left hand fused at odd angles from a bad heel. The skin of the forearms mapped with the pale geography of old burns. He set them flat on the table when he sat, like he was trying to keep them still. And the students arranged in the low half-circle of the lecture hall watched those hands and said nothing, because the hands told them this was not a man who had spent his life behind glass. His name was Zeev Kila. He was 71 years old. Akko Institute of Colonial Memory had given him this room every third cycle for 11 years. And every time he came, he sat in the same chair and told the same students. Always different faces. Always the same hunger in their eyes. A story that none of the official records would corroborate, because the official records had been sealed, classified, and buried under 3 layers of hegemony bureaucracy in the aftermath of what happened on Callow Moon. He always started the same way. "My name is Zeev Kila," he said. "I was 26 years old the first time I understood what humans are. I mean really understood. Not the textbook answer about tool use and language acquisition and abstract reasoning. I mean what we actually are, at the bottom, when everything else has been stripped away. I learned it on a dead moon at the edge of the reach, and it cost me almost everything. I'm going to tell you what happened. You're going to want to dismiss some of it. Don't. The hegemony spent a great deal of money making sure you'd want to dismiss it." He paused, drank from a battered metal cup that he'd brought himself. Name was Alex, and her father almost got us all killed. The Callow Mining Collective's operation on Callow 7 was not glamorous. It was not supposed to be. Callow 7 was a barren rock 11 light minutes from its parent star, geologically active in the way a corpse is sometimes active. Gas venting, minor seismic tremors, the deep subsurface groan of cooling rock that had been cooling for 4 billion years and still hadn't finished. Collective had bored 17 primary shafts into its crust over the course of 6 years, extracting silicate compounds and trace rare earths at a rate that made the operation barely profitable, and the 214 men and women who staffed the colony were the kind of people who had made peace with small margins and hard rock and particular loneliness of a sky that showed no stars because the dust clouds were too thick. Zeev had come for Alex. That was the honest answer. He'd been working a transit contract on the supply run between Callow 7 and the station hub at Perihelion 9, and Alex's father, Jake, Professor Jakob Renner, Geology, University of New Canberra, had been running the deep scan survey team for 3 cycles. And Alex had started flying out to visit him. And somewhere in the 4th visit, Zeev had found himself spending his layover days waiting for her ship. Rather than sleeping, she was not soft. That was the thing that kept surprising him, even after he knew her well. She had her father's jaw and her mother's eyes, and a laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone who hadn't yet decided whether anything was funny, and she read geological survey reports for fun. She could calculate drift pressure in her head. She wore her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she never once mentioned it. He loved her in the helpless, slightly stupid way that young men love women who are clearly more capable than they are. Jake Renner was a different matter. Zeev had met the man 6 times across as many months, and each time Jake had been cordial and distracted and faintly apologetic, the way a man is apologetic when he knows he owes you something: time, attention, honesty, and cannot bring himself to pay. He had the look of a person carrying freight, not physical weight. Something internal, lodged behind the sternum, that made his pauses too long and his smiles arrive a half-second late. Zeev had assumed it was the work. Survey teams on marginal operations were always under pressure. Numbers that wouldn't add up. Quotas that shifted. He was wrong about that. The call came at 3:40 station time, which was the middle of Zeev's sleep cycle, and it was Alex's voice but not Alex's tone. Clipped, flat, particular effect of someone who has decided that panic is not an option and is holding that decision by force of will. Something happened in Shaft 12. Dad won't answer his comm. "I need you here." He was already pulling his boots on. The colony was not large. 3 connected habitat rings around a central processing hub, corridors carved directly into the rock, lighting strips that ran amber rather than white, because someone had decided once that amber was easier on eyes that spent 12-hour shifts under artificial sun. It smelled like dust and machine oil and the faint sweetness of recycled air. Zeev knew the corridors the way you know a place you've walked half asleep 100 times. He found Alex outside the Shaft 12 access hatch, and the first thing he noticed was the blood on the floor. Not a lot. A smear, like something had been dragged. But the airlock indicator was green, which meant the shaft was pressurized and accessible. And that meant whatever had happened in there had not been a blowout. "How long since the last contact from the survey team?" he asked. 6 hours. Her jaw was set. There were 9 people down there. Who authorized an overnight survey? She looked at him with something between exhaustion and fury. He did. The access hatch opened outward when Zeev keyed it, and the smell hit them both immediately. Copper and something else, something older, like the interior smell of ancient machinery left sealed too long. Not decay, exactly, pre-decay. The smell of a space that had been closed for a very long time before very recently being opened. They went down. The shaft descended at a 20-degree grade for 400 meters before flattening into what the survey records called the primary anomaly chamber, a natural void in the moon's subsurface that the boring equipment had punched through 6 weeks ago. Jake's team had been surveying it. The chamber was large enough to park a frigate in, with walls that were smooth. In a way that volcanic rock is not smooth, formations along the floor that suggested, if you were willing to go there, intentional arrangement. Jake was alive. He was sitting with his back against one of the formations, his legs out in front of him, his hands in his lap. And he was looking at a point in the middle distance, with the focused attention of a man reviewing calculations. He looked up when they reached him. His expression did not change the way a father's expression changes when his daughter appears after 6 hours of no contact. "Alex," he said, "you shouldn't be here. Where are the others?" A pause, too long. "There was an incident. Where are the 9 people who came down here with you?" He looked at his hands. "I made a mistake," he said. "I thought I understood what we'd found. I thought." The reading suggested a containment structure of some kind. Biological. The composition of the chamber walls isn't volcanic. It's manufactured. Something was put here. A very long time ago. Zeev was scanning the chamber. No bodies. No blood except the smear at the hatch entrance. No equipment except a single survey drone, cracked open, its optical unit torn free. "Something was put here," Zeev said. "And you opened it." Jake's hands closed into fists in his lap. "I didn't know what it was." "What is it?" The first time since they'd reached him, Jake Renner looked afraid. And the fear on his face was not the fear of a man who'd made a professional error. It was the fear of a man who had looked at something and understood it completely. "Old," he said. "It's old. Older than this system. Older than the hegemony. Older than anything we have a name for." He closed his eyes. "And it's not alone anymore." They heard the first one in the upper corridor before they saw it. A sound like language run backward through a broken filter. Rhythmic, almost musical, with a subsonic undertone that Zeev felt in his back teeth before he consciously registered it as sound. He had no frame of reference for it at the time. Later, when the hegemony xenolinguistics teams spent 18 months analyzing the recordings, they would call it vocalized dominance assertion, and note that it carried embedded frequencies specifically calibrated to disrupt human neurological equilibrium, a kind of biological broadcast designed for effect. It worked. The first time Zeev heard it, his legs went briefly unsteady and his vision swam at the edges, and the instinct that hit him was not fight and not flight, but something older and, worse, the freeze response, the ancient mammalian shutdown that evolution had given to prey animals facing a predator too large to process, pushed through it. He would spend a long time, later, thinking about that moment. The way he recognized the freeze for what it was, named it, and moved anyway. Boots on rock, hand on Alex's arm. "Moving, Jake," Alex said sharply. "Get up, we're leaving." "It won't help," Jake said. He got up. The entity that the colony would come to call Henton. The name Jake had found scratched in an archaic script on the chamber walls, which the survey AI had translated provisionally as the one who was sealed, was not like anything in the hegemony's xenobiology catalog. It was not like anything in anyone's catalog because the catalog was built from species encountered in the last 300 years of human Expansion in Henton predated that expansion by geological margins. It was large, bipedal in rough outline, proportions were wrong in ways that compounded. The limbs too long, the torso too compressed, the neck articulated at angles that suggested a skeletal structure that had solved the problem of upright locomotion through a completely different, evolutionary pathway. Its skin, if skin was the right word, appeared dark in the amber corridor lighting, the surface texture that seemed to shift, not moving exactly, but never entirely still, the way oil moves on water. Its eyes were what Zeev remembered. Not the color, the expression. The complete total absence of anything that could be read as uncertainty. Whatever Henton was, it was not confused. It was not cautious. It had been sealed in a chamber for what Jake's instruments suggested was somewhere between 40 and 60,000 years. And it had emerged from that confinement without a single motion that looked like adjustment or disorientation. It moved through the colony's corridors with the assurance of something returning to a space that had always belonged to it. That was the first thing that scared Zeev, not its size, not its speed, which was considerable, the assurance. The second thing was what it did to the people it found. Not killed. Not immediately, that would have been cleaner. Henton did. What the 9 survey team members had already discovered was something that the hegemony medical team would later classify as a parasitic conversion process, though that clinical language stripped the experience of everything that made it terrible. What it meant, in terms, was that the people it found did not stop existing, they changed. They became something that wore the shape of what they'd been, while their eyes went flat and their voices took on the same backward-filtered quality as Henton's, and they moved through the corridors with a purpose that was not their own. This was how Henton spread. This was what it had, presumably, done to whatever civilization had sealed it here, before that civilization found a way to lock it down. Zev understood this in pieces, over the course of 4 hours, while he and Alex and Jake retreated through the colony's upper levels and tried to reach the communications array. The comms array was on level 1, in the processing hub, and the processing hub was compromised by the time they reached the junction that led to. Zeev could see the lights. Normal lights, white strips, not amber, and see the figures moving in the corridor beyond the junction, and could tell from the way they moved that they were not the miners he'd shared meals with for 3 months. The relay, Alex said. If we can get to the external relay on the Hab Ring's outer surface, I can send a distress signal directly to the Perihelion 9 hub. It'll take 11 minutes to reach them, and 11 minutes to receive a response, but it's something, Zev said. It's something. Jake had not spoken in 20 minutes. He was sitting against the wall at the junction, his legs drawn up, his head tilted back. Not in the blank way of the converted, he was still himself, still visibly thinking. But something in his posture had shifted. He looked smaller. Not weaker, exactly. Smaller in the way a man looks when he has accepted accountability for something large. Dad, Alex said. External relay. Can you get us there? He looked at her for a long moment. In the story Zev would tell for the rest of his life, this was the moment that cost him the most to describe. The expression on Jake Renner's face in that junction, the amber light from the side corridor, throwing half his features into shadow. He was looking at his daughter the way a man looks at something he loves, from the far side of a distance he created. There's a service crawl space, Jake said finally, runs under the outer deck, maintenance access. Too narrow for a survey drone and almost certainly too narrow for, he paused, for what's moving in the corridors. I mapped it last month during the inspection survey. I know the route. He stood. I'll take point. Zeev started to say something. Alex touched his arm once briefly. A quiet signal, a small human gesture that said let him. They followed Jake Renner through his own crawl space, in single file, on hands and knees. 400 meters of conduit and recycled air duct and structural brace, moving in near total darkness toward the outer deck of the habitat ring. The external briefly was a dish array bolted to the Hab Ring's outer hull, accessible through an emergency maintenance airlock designed to be operable with or without suit pressure. There were emergency EVA suits in the locker beside the airlock, 2 of them, which was 2 fewer than they needed. But Zeev didn't raise this point, because he was already thinking about how to solve it. and raising it out loud would have meant arguing with Alex. He gave one suit to Jake. He didn't explain why. Alex gave him a look that said she understood, and that she was not happy about it, and that she was not going to fight about it now. The relay interface is manual, Jake said, suiting up. Physical controls are straightforward, but the authentication sequence is 12 digits, colony-specific. I have it, he tapped his temple. How long to transmit? Zeev asked. 2 minutes for a full distress package. Maybe 90 seconds if I strip it to essentials. Jake sealed his helmet. Through the visor, his expression was calm in the particular way of people who have decided to stop being afraid because being afraid is no longer useful. He looked, Zeev thought, like Alex. Not in the face, in the decision behind the face. The authentication will trigger an alert, Jake said. The system will register an active relay access. They'll know we're here. Then we need to be faster than they are. Jake put his hand on the airlock cycle control and looked at his daughter through the visor glass. Alex put her palm flat against the inside of the viewport. Not sentimental. Deliberate, present, steady. Acknowledging. The airlock cycled. Jake went through. On the other side of the airlock glass, in the gray nothing of Calo 7's thin atmosphere, Jake moved along the hull with a deliberateness that looked through the small viewport, almost like peace. He reached the relay array. His fingers moved on the controls. Zeev could see the small LEDs responding, the dish angling. 90 seconds, maybe less. Inside, Zev and Alex heard the corridor sounds change. Not louder, more directed. The backward-filtered voices that had been a general ambience in the middle distance were now moving with a purpose that was, unmistakably, they know, Alex said. Yeah, how long does he have? Zeev was watching Jake's hands on the relay controls. 30 seconds, maybe. And then? Then we run. Alex picked up a length of conduit pipe that had been lying against the airlock frame. Maintenance detritus, the kind of thing that accumulates in any working industrial space. And held it in both hands with the loose, unconsidered readiness of someone who had decided that the pipe was better than nothing and was not going to overthink it. She had never, Zeev knew, been in a fight in her life. She held the pipe like she'd been holding pipes her whole life. That was the moment, not the signal, not the eventual rescue. That was the moment Zeev would talk about for the rest of his life, in classrooms on Akko, to students who had never held a pipe in a dark corridor on a dead moon. The moment he understood what he meant, when he said he understood what humans are. They are not optimized for this. That's the key thing. The galaxy is full of things that are optimized, built by millions of years of natural selection for exactly this kind of encounter. Fast and strong, and able to ignore pain signals that would shut a human down in seconds. Henton, ever it was, had been the apex of something once. Ancient, perfect for what it did. And Alex Renner was standing in a maintenance airlock with a piece of conduit pipe, refusing to be afraid, because she had decided that fear was not useful and she had things to do. The outer airlock light went green. Jake came through. Sent, he said, pulling his helmet off. His face was gray. It went, all of it, location, species data, everything I had in the survey logs. He paused. They'll know what they're coming for. The corridor junction exploded. That's not an exaggeration. The hatch at the end of the corridor came off its frame, not opened, came off. And the first of the converted miners filled the opening, and behind it Zeev could see more. And behind those, the darkness at the corridor's end, resolving into the slow, assured movement of something large. Henton, coming at a walk, because it had no reason to hurry. What happened in the next 11 minutes, the time before a signal could arrive at, for Hellion 9, and the response time, was irrelevant, because a response couldn't arrive in under 22 minutes, has been reconstructed from 3 different accounts and the colony's backup sensor logs, which survived in a hardened data capsule, and were recovered by the response team. 18 days later, the short version, Zeev, Alex, and Jake ran. The longer version is the part that matters. They ran through the Habring service level, but through corridors that Jake knew from his inspection survey, and Jake led because he had the map in his head, and the other two didn't, and he led without hesitation, taking corners at speed, calling out directions in a flat, even voice that had no room in it for panic. And the converted miners came behind them, in a wave that moved with the eerily coordinated rhythm of things sharing a single direction. Henton did not move faster. It did not need to. It was patient in the way that very old things are patient. The patience of something that has spent 40,000 years in a sealed chamber and emerged without urgency, because urgency implies the possibility of loss, and Henton had not, in its operational history, experienced loss. This was, it turned out, critical miscalculation. Not the patience, the assumption. Jake brought them to the colony's power management node, a room 2 levels below the central hub, crammed with relay systems and thermal regulators and the primary coupling interface for all 6 of the colony's fusion reactors. He had, realized, been heading here deliberately. This had been a plan that Jake had formed at some point in the corridor while they were moving, assembled from pieces of what he knew about this facility and what he'd learned about what was chasing them. The reactors are coupled, Jake said, pulling open a panel. They share load through this interface. If I break the coupling on 5 and 6 and let them spike, the containment field fails, Alex said. Not fails. It initiates a controlled emergency shutdown that requires a physical reset. Vents plasma through the secondary exhaust system. He looked at the panel, which runs through the lower levels. Where Henton will be, Zeev said. Where Henton will be. Alex stared at the panel. The node is in the lower levels. Yes. A beat, Dad. The shutdown sequence takes about 4 minutes once initiated. The coupler has to be physically held in the override position, or it resets. It's a failsafe against accidental initiation. He said this the way you explain something that doesn't require emotional commentary. Plain. Factual. I'll hold it, Zeev said immediately. Jake looked at him, not unkindly. You don't know this system. You'll do it wrong, and we'll have a reactor fire instead of a controlled vent. I've been running these reactors for 6 months. Zeev opened his mouth. Alex put her hand on his arm. The same signal as before, let him, but different now. Not letting the older man take point on a crawlspace run. This was different and she knew it, and her hand was very steady. Is there any other way? She asked her father. Jake thought about it. Zeev watched him think, watched the actual consideration happen in real time. Not a performance, not a resignation, a genuine calculation. Jake Renner was an honest man when the chips were fully down. Not in the time we have, he said. Corridor beyond the node room thudded with footsteps. Then we go, Alex said. Zeev, we go. Alex, we go. Her voice was even. Father's voice. Jake was already at the panel, already pulling the coupler free of its housing, a man in his element doing the thing he knew how to do. He looked over his shoulder at his daughter one final time, and the look on his face, Zeev would try many times to describe this, and would always come close and never nail it, was not tragic, was not resigned, was something that looked, against all logic, like relief. The relief of a man who has been carrying a secret too long and has finally put it down. I love you, Alex, he said. Tell them what's down there. Make sure they know. They'll know, she said. I'll make sure. They left him holding the coupler. Zeev kept his hand on Alex's shoulder as they ran. Not steering, not supporting, just contact, and neither of them spoke. And the colony's lighting system began to flicker as the reactor coupling bled power. Amber strips going intermittent, casting the corridors in a stuttering half-dark. They were 3 levels up when the vent sequence fired. The sound it made was not an explosion. It was a subsonic whumph that Zeev felt in his sternum and his back teeth simultaneously, and then a deep structural groan that ran through the hab-ring's frame like a bell tone through metal, and then a silence that was absolute for exactly 4 seconds before the emergency klaxons kicked on. In the silence between the vent and the klaxons, Zeev heard something stop. Backward filtered voices that had been a constant presence in the corridors. The ambient noise of converted miners, moving through their colony with alien purpose, simply stopped, between one breath and the next. Gone. He didn't let himself think about what that meant about the range of the thermal vent. He kept running. Response team from Perihelion 9 arrived 18 hours later. A hegemony emergency response frigate with a security contingent and a xenobiology team, and 3 people from an office that didn't have a name on their jackets, told Zeev everything he needed to know about how seriously the signal had been taken. They found Zeev and Alex in the Habring's upper observation deck, which had emergency oxygen and a heat source, and a viewport that looked out at the gray dust haze of Calo 7's thin sky. Zeev had rigged a heat blanket from the emergency locker, and they were sitting under it. And Alex had his hand and was not crying. Had not cried. Had not made a sound except breathing for the 8 hours since the vent fired. When the response team breached the airlock, the first one through was a young security officer who stopped when he saw them and said, particular careful tone of someone who has been briefed on a bad situation, "Are you the two who sent the signal?" "Father sent the signal," Zev said. "From the external relay. He's the one you owe." The officer didn't know what to do with that. He looked at Alex. Alex looked back at him with her father's jaw and her mother's eyes, and the expression of someone who has things to do and is waiting for the people who are supposed to help her to understand that the time for careful tones has passed. "There's a chamber in shaft 12, she said, manufactured, pre-colonial. Whatever was living in it is gone now, but the chamber is intact and you need people who know what they're looking at." She stood, letting the heat blanket fall. "I know the survey logs. I know what my father found. I'll brief your xenobiology team." She looked at the officer. "And I'd like someone to tell me what happened to the colony personnel my father couldn't save. I want names. I want to know them." The officer took a breath. "Of course. Good." She moved toward the airlock, paused, looked back at Ziv. "Coming?" He stood. Of course he was coming. He was always going to be coming, for the rest of his life, which was a fact he understood clearly, and without drama. He followed her through the airlock. The hegemony sealed the Calo 7 incident under 3 levels of classification within 48 hours of response team's arrival. The official record listed the incident as a catastrophic equipment failure resulting in fatal decompression and the loss of colony personnel. A memorial was erected at Perihelion 9. It did not mention Jake Renner by name. Zev and Alex spent 6 weeks in a debriefing facility on Akko that was comfortable and well-staffed, and did not have locks on the outside of the doors, technically, but also did not have anything resembling freedom of movement. They answered every question, submitted to every scan, recorded every detail. They could recover from memory about the nature and behavior and physical characteristics of what they'd encountered. At the end of 6 weeks, a man then aimed off came to speak with them. He was pleasant. He explained pleasantly that the information they'd provided was extremely valuable, and that the hegemony took the matter with the utmost seriousness, and that for reasons of public safety and operational security, they would be asked to maintain confidentiality regarding the specifics of the incident. He used the word asked in the way that people use it when they mean required. Alex looked at him for a long moment. "My father died making sure you knew what was in that chamber," she said. "He stripped his own distress signal to essentials, so he had time to include the full survey data. He wanted you to understand what you were dealing with." "And we do understand," the man said. "Grateful." "He didn't do it so you could seal it," Alex said. "He did it so humanity would know. So the next team that bores into something they don't recognize on a marginal moon at the edge of nowhere doesn't wake up the same mistake." She held the man's gaze. "Seal the operational details." "Fine, don't seal the warning." The man said he would pass her concerns along. She did not believe him. She was right not to believe him. She told Zeev, the night before they were released, that she intended to spend the rest of her professional life making sure the warning couldn't be buried. Not by publishing it, which would bring the full weight of hegemony classification down on them, but by doing what her father had done, becoming the person in the room who knew the system, getting into rooms, understanding how things worked, making herself indispensable. "You can't fight the hegemony head-on," she said. They were sitting by the facility's one window, which faced west, toward a sunset that was spectacularly indifferent to human problems. "But you can make sure the right information is in the right place at the right time." "That's a long project," Zev said. "Yes, I'll help." She looked at him. "You don't have to, I know." She looked back at the window. The sunset was doing its thing, orange going to red going to the deep blue of oncoming dark. "He hummed," she said quietly, "when he was working on something difficult. Some old song our mum used to sing. I could hear him humming when he was at the reactor panel." She stopped. "I didn't tell the debrief team that. I don't know why I'm telling you." Because it's true, Zeev said. And the true things are the ones worth keeping. She didn't answer. But she didn't move away from the window, and they watched the dark come in together, side by side, and the stars appeared one by one through the facility's scratched glass. In the lecture hall, on Akko, the old man with the scarred hands lifted his battered cup and drank the last of whatever was in it. Hegemony classified the chamber, he said. They sent a team. Presumably the team reported. Presumably, the report is sitting in a file that no one has opened in 30 years. What they found or didn't find, in that lower level, I don't know. I know what I heard stop, and I know what that meant. He set the cup down. Henton is gone. Whatever else was using those miners is gone. The chamber still exists, presumably. Sealed again, by people who understand this time what they're sealing. He looked at his hands on the table. Jacob Renner held a coupler in a reactor control panel for 4 minutes because he was the only one who knew the system well enough to do it right, and because his daughter needed a route out, and because he had made a mistake. And he was the kind of man who paid his debts. The old man's voice didn't waver, but it slowed slightly, the way a voice slows when it's carrying weight. He is not on the memorial at Perihelion 9. He is not in any database you will be able to access. The work he did, 6 months of survey data on a manufactured pre-colonial structure that predates every xenobiological category we have, is in a sealed file. He paused. But you know now, that's not nothing. A student near the back raised her hand. She was young. They were always young. Zeev thought, and then remembered that he had also been young once, and that youth was not the same as ignorance. What happened to Alexandra Renner? She asked. The corner of the old man's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something warmer than a smile and quieter. She became a professor of geology, he said. University of New Canberra, same as her father. She spent 32 years as the leading authority on pre-colonial subsurface structures in the Reach. She trained the people who now know what to look for when a boring operation opens a chamber that isn't volcanic, that has walls that are too smooth, that smells like a space sealed a very long time ago. He looked at the students, at their faces, young and hungry and waiting. She made sure the warning was in the right place at the right time. She did it through people, not publications, through conversations in the rooms that mattered. He picked up the battered cup, found it empty, set it down again. They sealed the file. Int. Seal her. Silence in the lecture hall. The particular silence of people who are thinking rather than waiting for what comes next. What are humans? The old man said. The textbook will tell you we're adaptable, that we use tools, that we reason abstractly, that we cooperate at scale. That's all true, but it's not the answer. He pressed his scarred hands flat on the table, the way he always did when he sat, the way that had become, over 11 years of this room, the gesture that meant he was about to say the thing he'd come to say. The answer is, we're the species that holds the coupler. We're the species that stands in a maintenance airlock with a piece of conduit pipe because we've decided that fear isn't useful. We're the species that hums an old song while we do the thing that needs doing, and then we're the species that spends the rest of our lives making sure the next person doesn't have to learn it the hard way. He stood, slowly, in the way of a man whose knees have logged their complaints and been noted. Henton was 40,000 years old when we found it. It was sealed by people who understood what it was, who built a chamber that held for 40 millennia, who left warnings written in script on the walls that a survey AI could partially translate. Those people are gone. Whatever they were, they're gone, and Henton outlasted them. He picked up his battered cup. It did not outlast us. He walked out of the lecture hall without another word, the way he always did. No questions, no lingering, no performance of conclusion, just the exit, and the door, and the quiet of an empty room. The students sat for a while before they started talking. Outside, through the facility's long windows, the planet Akko was doing its slow turn toward morning, and the light coming over the eastern ridge was the particular deep amber of a young star at low angle, and it fell through the glass in long warm across the body chairs, and it looked for a moment very much like the light in a corridor deep underground, where a woman had once stood with a pipe in her hands and decided, without drama, she was going to do.